It may feel like that we are reading a shocking new report on climate change every single day. In just the past few months, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, released a report titled Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is explained in this report that since the Industrial Revolution, humans have warmed the planet by nearly 1 degree Celsius, and we are on the path to 1.5 degrees, and that it is only with major economic mobilization and an extremely rapid transition to cleaner technology. Without that, we can expect to see a rise by 2 degrees Celsius within the next 20 years maximum. While that doesn't seem like a major difference, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius rather than 2 could make it possible for us to reduce the impacts on human health and save entire ecosystems that both humans and wildlife depend on. As you may recall from my previous speech, many scientists believe that we are either hurtling toward or in the middle of the sixth mass extinction. This event is different from all other extinctions before it in that it is undoubtedly being caused by humans. Along with deforestation, invasive species, and chemicals introduced by humans, human-made climate change is destroying habitats at a pace not seen in millennia. It is impossible for animals to adapt to such a rapid rate of change, and according to the Center for Biological Diversity, we are losing species at thousands of times the normal extinction background rate. The issue of climate change is a complex one, and there is no one solution that doesn't involve massive changes in how we live and what technology we use. But that doesn't mean that we can't try to mitigate some of the effects now. When it comes to the incredible rate at which we are losing species, many different non-governmental organizations dedicated to this very problem have emerged in recent decades. However, there were gaps that these organizations had trouble filling, namely public outreach and funding. This is where zoos stepped up. The threat of countless species being lost to the world forever is very real and very present, and the world's best zoos are vital to preventing that from happening. In this speech, I will explain the problem facing us in a little more detail, as well as the solutions available to us and why zoos are one of the most invaluable tools available to us at the present time. First, I will explain the extent of the problem and why we should care about species degradation. Second, I will go over why zoos are important to the conservation effort, and third, I will discuss the impact zoos conservation has already had and what it may look like in the future. Alright, so first I'm explaining the extent of the problem and why we should care in the first place. Because some people might ask, why should I care? Why does it matter to me if some tiny frog on a random island vanishes, or an unpleasant-looking vulture species diminishes into nothing? The fact is, we should care a lot. There is a human toll to species extinctions, no matter how far removed you may think you are. In the 1990s, Indian scientists were scrambling to figure out why the South Asian gypsy vulture population was dropping so rapidly, literally several million more than average each year. The cause was found to be a veterinary drug called diclofenac, given to livestock, that caused the vultures to die of kidney failure after eating the dead livestock. The loss of these birds set off a domino effect in the environment. The vultures were vital to the disposal of livestock carcasses that weren't eaten. With their decline, feral dogs and rats took over, bringing a number of transmissible diseases with them, including rabies, anthrax, and plague, which altogether cost $34 billion in health costs. Since the impact of the decline of vultures is so visible, efforts to conserve the species make a lot of sense. However, the decline of any species can be an important indicator of environmental and human health. The loss of species diversity can lead to an increase in the transmission of diseases in humans. A 2008 study by John Swaddle, a biologist at the College of William and Mary, showed a strong link between low bird diversity in the US and an increased risk of West Nile infection in humans. Species declines are like early warning systems. Animals are often the first indicator that something is wrong with the environment in which they and we live. And you are probably already familiar with a good example of this. The decline of bald eagles in North America exposed the harmful effects of DDT before any permanent damage was done to the environment. And lastly, all species provide what scientists call an ecosystem service, services that nature provides to human communities. Pollination is the most recognizable ecosystem service, and honeybees and other insects pollinated over $30 billion worth of crops in 2010. However, honeybee populations have been declining across the world, and U.S. farmers reported a 40% loss in beehives from 2014 to 2015. Mangrove trees, on the other hand, protect coastlines and other environments from hurricanes, they reduce flooding, and they create natural fisheries. And the services provided by these trees are estimated to be worth $186 billion each year. So, the loss of any species can lead to a very high cost for human populations. Alright, now I'm going to go over why zoos are important to fighting against extinction. Zoos are unique because they have the skills and resources to preserve species, and the ability to engage millions of people with wildlife that no other conservation effort has. As you may recall from my previous speech, in his book The Ark and Beyond, philosopher Ben Mintier closely examined the role of zoo conservation. He compared the role of zoos to be similar to Noah's Ark, in that their job has become to take in, protect, and breed captive populations in order to prevent the species from all-out extinction. This model has become the core of what makes the zoo in the 80s with the creation of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or the AZA. For all AZA-accredited zoos, their primary focus outside of running the zoo should be conservation. The AZA helps zoos all over the country publish reports, work on field conservation, strive for green business practices, and is their primary source of funding for conservation projects. The people employed by zoos are generally experts in animal care and well-being, and are vital to conservation efforts that would otherwise fail without their expertise. Oftentimes, conservation efforts get their most valuable staff from zoos. In The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert, she details how frog experts who worked in zoos worked alongside with scientists to preserve multiple frog species in Panama. And according to the CEO of Zoos Victoria in Australia, Jenny Gray, zookeepers are often major parts of conservation efforts because of their, quote, practical animal knowledge, scientific training, and deep passion for wildlife that makes them ideal conservationists, end quote. It's pretty well known that zoos attract a decent number of visitors worldwide. They are the reason millions of people are able to see animals in real life that they otherwise would have never encountered. According to ethicist Anna Peterson, loving an animal leads us to believe that animals are inherently worth loving and have intrinsic value. Emotional relationships with real animals, rather than just the concept of them, significantly increases how much you care for an animal. Zoos are a rare opportunity for people to do that with a wild animal. It is inherent that we value things that we feel strong emotions for, and we are more likely to not participate in behaviors that threaten them. This is exemplified by a campaign by the Melbourne Zoo to label products with palm oil so people can avoid using those products. The zoo got over 167,000 signatures because they highlighted the destruction that the palm oil industry causes to orangutan habitats. People jumped on the campaign because they have seen the zoos own orangutans, an animal that they never would have otherwise encountered. Alright, and lastly, I will discuss the impact zoo conservation has already had and what it may look like in the future. Dozens of zoos across the country participate in the AZA's Species Survival Plan Program, or SSP, which, quote, aims to manage the breeding and specific endangered species in order to help maintain healthy and self-sustaining populations that are both genetically diverse and demographically stable. These types of programs are only expected to grow in the future. The AZA currently administers around 113 different SSPs that cover 81 individual species. These programs have helped many different species survive, including black-footed ferrets, California condors, red wolves, orangutans, and the Humboldt penguin. These programs are responsible for dwindling populations not only to be repopulated in captivity, but in the wild as well. A good example of this is the bongo, which is a threatened antelope species native to Africa, which has now grown to stable numbers because of an SSP reintroduction program. Many within the zoo industry are expecting zoos to change a lot within the next few decades as well. Ron L. Kagan, who is the executive director and CEO of the Detroit Zoo, believes that within the next 20 years that flagship animals, which means, big animals that draw visitors like elephants and whales, will no longer be held in zoos or in aquariums unless they are unable to survive in the wild. And only those animals that are able to thrive in captivity will be living in zoos alongside rescues. He also believes that conservation efforts will grow dramatically, with greater investment in conservation and more active field work being performed. The growing trend in the public for the ethical treatment of animals and the threat of rapid extinction has so far outpaced zoos' efforts to keep up. However, the effect of zoo conservation programs are already being seen. They are tangible and they are growing. One only needs to look at successes like the American bison, which would have gone extinct decades ago if not for zoo conservation programs. So, I have just demonstrated the extent of the problem that we are facing and why it is so important that we start to act, why zoos are of unique importance to the conservation effort, and the impacts of zoo conservation now and possibly in the future. The changes that our world is facing are challenging in their variety and relentless in their speed, but most are the consequences of human activity, and thus are our responsibility to alleviate. When it comes to the extinction crisis, which is the result of climate change, deforestation, and other human activity, we have a solution that comes from institutions that already exist. Zoo conservation programs have saved countless species from being lost forever and are a unique and invaluable tool to fighting extinction.